So, for your cabinet member interview, Fiona, which you've come to ask since I've been chairing quite a few times now. You're familiar with the process.
Not as many times as I used to come.
Yeah, right. Okay, yes. So, if you could give us an introduction. I know there's the obvious issue of the forthcoming budget, and it would be good if you touched on that. There are some aspects of IT that we've not discussed so far this evening, the more structural aspects which you mentioned earlier. But could you give us an overview of your portfolio, kind of 5 minutes or so, and then I think that people in the committee, I'm sure, have got some idea of various areas that they might ask you about. But if you could kick off, that would be great.
Sure. Yes, my portfolio is a pretty wide-ranging one across the council. Finance, modernisation and performance. So, of course, the number one biggest issue for me this year and for the next month and a half at least is setting the council's budget. You'll doubtlessly be aware that we published a draft budget in December, setting out proposals for £67 million worth of savings. We received the draft local government settlement just before Christmas. And I suppose the biggest headline is out of that is that actually quite good news, which is that we thought we had a £30 million budget gap beyond the 67 million, and we don't appear to have that after all. The settlement is not so bad as we feared. Government seems to have moved away from particularly hitting the councils that are more grant dependent, and it has instead been councils that rely more heavily on council tax income who have seen the larger hits. That's a real reversal, very, very welcome news. Nonetheless, the £67 million of savings still seem to be very much necessary to make our budget balance. We're doing a lot of work to digest that. Duncan's here with me tonight if you want to ask more deep information about the settlement, the lack of clarity around some of the issues such as the later years, government saying you can have a 4-year settlement if you sign up to an efficiency programme, but with no clarity about what that means, and we're always delivering efficiencies, so on the face of it should be very straightforward, but we're not clear on that yet. Of course, their other big announcement was around the adult social care preset. We need to write to them, the Finance Director will write to them on Friday, and we will be indicating, as I believe most councils in London and across the country are doing, that we are minded to take the 2% adult social care precept, although that is subject to greater detail from government still about what the restrictions are around how that's used and how it affects what we can do in terms of delivering savings on adult social care, and of course to the decision of Council Assembly at the end of February. So I probably don't want to go into too much more detail on budget because we're going to spend hours on budget
we'll have
on the
plenty of budget.
2nd of February, so probably don't want to do too much on that. Revs and bends within the finance area is another big part of my portfolio, and this year they've been extremely successful. They had previously won the IRRB Gold Award for being most improved revenue and benefits service. This year they've won the gold for being the best revenues service in the country, and I think it was bronze, sort of runner-up for benefits as well. So extremely successful for service that has only recently come in-house. We're seeing processing times coming down, collection improving, so really doing very well. Looking forward, our big challenges there are around the introduction of universal credit. People will know, of course, that there's a pilot already for Universal Credit Digital, has just started in the North Borough, SE15, and that is expected to roll out over the next year across the whole of the London Bridge JCP area, and we have just very recently heard that from October it will roll out full universal credit across the other two JCPs covering Southwark, Kennington and Peckham, so that from the end of October housing benefit will not be open to new applicants of working age anywhere in Southwark. That's got some implications, of course, not only for our residents but from the council. Our housing benefit administration grant is being massively cut. We've been told that staff will not have 2p rights to go over to DWP. So there's some pretty serious implications of that. So we're currently sort of digesting that. We're beginning to get some data about the people in that first area of rollout of universal credit. So we're tracking those new claimants, many of whom are council tenants or temporary accommodation tenants, particularly in the new Willow Walk temporary accommodation units. So we're tracking that to see how things go for them as they wait for their claims to be processed. I think it was particularly worrying to hear that at Job Centre in London Bridge, the staff there have a little leaflet to advertise the Southwark Emergency Support Scheme funded by us, so that when they're telling people it will be 6 weeks or more before they get their universal credit, they're telling them, off you go to the council because we're not giving you your benefits. So again, we're waiting to see if that comes through, that the delays in getting universal credit and having their benefits processed results in more cost impact on the council. But it's early to say at the moment. Other big areas are IT. So I'm sure you would like to hear, and you will be pleased to hear, that I think things have been a little bit more stable, albeit not good. Like Councillor Samurai, my BlackBerry was not functioning well. In a sort of ironic moment, as Councillor Burgess and I were preparing just before the meeting, she asked me, because I was logged on, could I print off the latest draft of the digital strategy, and the answer was no, I couldn't. I could print the first 4 pages 4 times. I wanted 2 copies of the whole thing. So there are still significant issues there, albeit there are some improvements coming through. We are seeing slightly fewer calls to the service desk, and they're about to introduce password self-service reset, which should again reduce the volumes going through to the service desk. We're also looking at, BlackBerries are not the future, clearly, and starting to look at what could be the future for accessing and emails and remote working in terms of mobile devices for that. But the big news that you'll be delighted to hear, I'm sure, is that the current contract with Capita is due to expire at the end of January 2017. Now, the nature of the contract was that there was the potential for that to be extended for a further 2 years. We have received Capita's proposals for that extension. It's been properly considered by the IT Sourcing Board, chaired by Jerry, and having assessed that proposal, we have decided that that extension proposal will not be accepted, and the report that comes to Cabinet in February will be a Gateway Zero procurement report.
The Edwards Gateway, as I
the new Gateway style, laying out our IT procurement strategy, so that we will procure a range of smaller contracts covering a range of different IT elements. I mean, I think my big concern, having been a councillor a bit longer, is I know that people are frustrated with the current contractor, but we were equally very frustrated with the previous contractor, and so the fact that we will be taking a very different approach on procuring a number of smaller contracts for different elements of IT, and to have a more flexible, agile approach, and perhaps, Capita and others are on the framework that we'll be going through, the government framework, isn't it? So they will also be bidding, and they may well win elements of that service. But we'll also be looking at some smaller providers for whom we will be, of course, a much more important part of their business. So that's what the report will be about. February for that. That's probably enough.
Okay, no, that's good. Can I'll jump in with one just about that announcement with regard to the Capita contract. I without having been closely involved in any of those contract discussions, does seem to me to be the right decision based on what's happened thus far in the contract. The concern, though, and this is inescapable, there's no way around this. So the concern is that in the last couple of years of the contract, that the service is reduced and it actually becomes worse because we're no longer a priority. Now, given that things haven't been great when we supposedly should have been a priority, that's obviously quite worrying. What work is going to be done to stop that from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
It is a concern that
Yeah.
we have faced, which is why I think it is important to stress that it is open to Capita to bid for contracts within the new process, and they know that this contract has not worked. It hasn't worked for them any more than it has worked for us. So we'll be continuing to work very closely with them and to hold them to their contract. I don't know if there's anything Jerry or Richard want to add on that particular point.
Certainly the governance arrangements in terms of the executive board that we have with Capita once a month are continuing. We, as Councillor Colley said, there are areas where, albeit small, we have seen some improvements. We haven't seen, since we've informed them that we're not going to extend the contract as is, that complete foot off the pedal at all.
Okay.
And so, we're reassured by that. And we have another board coming up next week where we'll be talking about the next steps. So, from Capita's perspective, there are opportunities. We're not saying farewell, but there's a different type of contract provision where they may be more able to deliver some elements well, and other elements, other providers are going to be better placed to do that. So we've had a very open conversation about that.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, Rebecca.
I wanted to ask you about kind of the changes around universal credit. What type of support are we giving people who are going to be kind of enrolled in it? Are we doing council support, training, and the like, and also in terms of kind of financial support and advice for people who now are getting one payment and have to pay their rent and their council tax and their housing benefit, whereas before the money might have appeared and gone through without them necessarily having had to do it themselves?
Yes, so we are involved in currently delivering alongside Lambeth and Lewisham universal support delivered locally to claimants in. We've been piloting that in Peckham, but we're also now working with universal credit applicants. At the moment, they are referred by JCP staff to us, and then support is delivered through voluntary sector providers principally. We've so far of people claiming in the universal credit area, so 146 universal credit claims that have been registered by DWP in that initial rollout area. 20 claimants have been referred for personal budget support, so budgeting, and 12 claimants referred for digital support in that area. It has to be said, people don't always take up that support that is offered, but it's very much on offer. Now, whether in the future DWP will continue to commission that support through the council and through that tri-borough arrangement, I can't say for sure. I mean, that is something that we are commissioned to deliver through that, and it remains to be seen whether that continues.
And if I can ask a very quick follow-up then, are we expecting any knock-on effects on any of our collections or any of our services, and are we kind of monitoring and then supporting? Are we giving some leeway to people as well who might not realise they needed to make payments that they might not?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly one of our greatest concerns. When we undertook a pilot of direct payments of housing benefit rather than housing benefit netting off, we did that jointly with Family Mosaic. So we had a fairly small sample of people, and very rapidly a significant number of people got into rent arrears, and we ended up with additional costs having to employ more rent officers to chase up the rent, and at that stage, because it was a pilot, if people were getting into trouble, we quickly re-established housing payments being paid direct, so that people were not getting into major rent arrears. So it certainly is something of very significant concern to us, and very much why we are working very closely with JCP to track those changes. We know that at least 12 of those new claims, universal credit claims, are LBS housing tenants. There may be more than that, and that 11 are temporary accommodation residents, and that we've had 37 notices to stop paying housing benefit from JCP because people are moving over to universal credit. What I've asked the team to do is to continue tracking that, to really study this in detail. It's helpful now that rent collection sits with the Revs and Bens team, the new Exchequer service, together, so it's quite easy for us to track but we are considering whether we might commission an independent outside body to particularly do a piece of research work for us on this. We are going to be one of the first areas in the country to see this roll out fully across our entire borough when it goes live by the end of October, so significantly ahead of other places. So we think it would be very useful learning for all the country, really, for us to do that piece of work and to track it. There's going to be some communications work done, and I have particularly asked officers to prepare and to offer briefings for members as we get more detail on the rollout and more detail coming through from that initial area and some more lessons coming from that.
Yeah, and yeah, because I guess a lot of us will see people coming to surgeries with queries and things, so actually having a place where we can then direct them to would be really useful as well.
Good, thank you. Anoud.
Thanks, Fiona. I promised myself I wasn't going to ask anything about IT because I get so cross, and I know people laugh, but actually I think it's really serious. I think the productivity I lost this afternoon, if that's replicated, and I slightly worry whenever I hear IT discussed at Scrutiny that it's all Capita's fault, and I just worry in any situation in life when something is all somebody else's fault. And actually I hope at least privately the council is looking at what it's got wrong over the last few years about managing that contract and whether it actually was trying to get too much out of Capita too cheaply or what, but something's gone wrong at our end as well, and I hope that is explored. So that's me not asking or saying anything about IT. I wanted to talk a bit about revenues and benefits. Firstly, to congratulate the team on their award, and to say they should also get an award for getting awards, because they're very good at doing that, and I think that's really important for morale of the staff, and so please pass thanks back to them. I have had a little concern recently. I've had a few cases at surgery now where people have walked in with huge piles of correspondence with demands and a letter one day saying you've got this overpayment and 2 days later different. And I've asked officers to review just what correspondence we're sending out and the volume and that conflicting stuff, because I think that's just so distressing to individuals, and certainly those cases at surgeries, it's taken me a good hour to go through it all with them, and I just think if people don't have brilliant literacy, it's a real struggle. So if I can just flag that to you as something I've asked officers to look at. Specifically, I wanted to talk about council tax collection rates. You know, this is something that we were very supportive of bringing the service back in-house because we thought it would increase collection rates. I've just seen the report for full council which says the collection rate for next year is 96.75%. That's lower than the actual collection rate was in 2007-8. So why are we setting targets that are behind when we've actually said we're bringing it in-house to increase collection rates? So I just wondered if you could explain a bit what's going wrong.
I think the history with the collection rate is that from that high point it dropped very significantly, as you will recall, to the point where we were one of the worst in London. I'm getting there, don't worry.
Good.
We then grew very significantly, and then we saw a step back, because I was asking very much the same questions when the officers were showing me the draft report. That coincided with the abolition of council tax benefit and the move to council tax reduction scheme. Although we collect very well on for people who are on that reduced rate rather than full council tax relief, which is what they used to get, it is not at the level that council tax collection is for people who are paying who don't get council tax reduction. So we saw that step back, and now we're gradually recouping that. I'm assured that we are going to get there, and that officers are confident that we will exceed.
You said that last year, Fiona.
Yeah, but we have improved this year, and we will improve next year. But there was a step back in 2013, I think if you look at the pattern, which coincided with the abolition of council tax benefit.
Can I just one follow-up is every London borough had that abolition, and we're still way behind other London boroughs.
But did other London boroughs see some step back? Was the pattern similar across that would be the significant statistic, wouldn't it?
And why are we still, having said the problem, we need to bring it in-house, we're going to step up the collection, we're still not at the level of other London boroughs?
I think we are at the level, we were the worst in London, and we have rapidly grown up that table, and we're not.
Can you get us the figures of where we are on that table? Because I'm not convinced that's correct.
Okay, good. Okay, Tom.
Just coming back to IT, just wondering when you're looking at new contracts and so on, how much we're looking at new ways of working. We heard a lot from the digital strategy stuff earlier about future proofing and making sure that we're fit for purpose. I mean, in terms of BlackBerry, for example, so I was thinking about the ways different people work. Are you looking at ways different? So I know there's only a few councillors, and we're not, we aren't as urgent in terms of getting the right tech as some areas of the council that do very important work. But these, for example, say I'm out and about and I want to take a photo of something, or a resident brings me something I want to send on. I end up taking a photo on this, emailing it to my council email, and then going onto the computer, because I can't do it on here really, and then forwarding it from there. And so rather than do it at surgery, I'm on here tethered to this in order to do what I need to do, and none of that tech is council tech. And I just wonder, in terms of things like bring your own device for email, the ability to use what we have on us every day, to send stuff quickly, to reduce some of that time cost, but also in terms of you talked about smaller contractors because we'd be a more important client to them. I was wondering if you also think about I'm thinking straight off Google for email, which is a much larger contractor and actually could deal with an organisation our size without even blinking. So there are people out there, and that then takes away that level where you have to have Outlook and licenses for Outlook. It takes away the need to upgrade that. It's all online already, and there are many large companies around the world using that sort of tech. So I just wondered if that's something you're considering as well.
Yeah, we absolutely are. As it happens, we very recently met with Google for Business to discuss exactly that, the potential for using not just really for email and diary, but for that collaboration piece that Councillor Burgess was speaking of. They've offered to do a pilot with us, which we're working through. I'm not really have an update. We talked about some councils being a part of it, but you're right to say that whilst councillors are very important, we have thousands of other members of staff who are also extremely important and providing a service to staff, to our residents. I always think perhaps when it comes to truly testing out collaborative working, that while councillors do a bit of that, probably not as much as some other members of staff. And I want to make sure that pilot, I think they were talking about 100 licences, weren't they? So we'll probably have a few councillors on that pilot, but we want really to have staff from across the council participating in that pilot. But certainly that's very much on our list of things to consider. I mean, it wouldn't for a pilot work for, say, me, because I need my PA to manage my diary, for instance, so you'd need everyone to be on it for it to work for some people. But I think it could be really interesting and useful.
Can I just
Well, I've got Ben next, so I'll come back to you in a moment.
Yeah, it's
Ben,
just on that point.
Well, Ben next.
I really loved your statement, Blackberries are not the future. I think that should be their tagline. My question was around modernisation.
Yes.
This is obviously a key priority. It's come up again and again in terms of IT, digital strategy, digital comms. Modernisation now sits with Jerry Scott. Yes. It's really good to see Jerry here today. I have a huge regard for Jerry and her department. I do have some concerns about these two key responsibilities, modernisation and housing, being with the same key officers. We don't want Jerry and her team to be pulled or squeezed between you and Richard Livingston, an unfortunate analogy. I wonder what just... Think about it. I mean, I think if you've got any comment, any thoughts on that to reassure us, but also I'd be interested to know from this, maybe more a question for Jerry, the proportion of your time you'll spend on modernisation versus housing.
Okay.
I mean, personally, I'm entirely comfortable with the reorganisation and Jerry being responsible for modernisation. I think very much when it comes down to it, what matters is that we have strong leadership, and I'm absolutely confident in Jerry's abilities to lead that modernisation piece of work. I think now that we have 5 rather than, I think, 9 or 10 strategic directors in the chief officer team, every one of our chief officers have a huge amount of responsibility, and increasingly the next layer down, they were called the Leadership Network, I think they're called the Directors Forum now, have to be expected to step up and take real leadership responsibility. We've made an appointment to the new director of Modernise, a fun title, but a very serious job. Emma Marinos. Emma Marinos, who will be starting with us shortly, March. And she will be the day-to-day lead, of course, for the Modernise piece of work. You know, Jerry's portfolio is large. David Quirk-Thornton's portfolio is also extremely large. You know, about 2/3 of the council's budget. I think a lot of our directors have very significant responsibilities. Duncan's, you know, your budget might not be quite so large, but you have a responsibility across the entire council for finance, that cross-cutting responsibility. I think all of our directors have immense responsibility and are there to be part of a leadership team. And so no, I don't have that concern. I mean, Jerry has a comment about how much of her time spent on housing versus modernisation.
I think the reality is that the whole of the senior leadership team has changed quite dramatically, and we made a conscious effort to deliver savings that we would have fewer better. But we have people who are experts, absolutely, on residence services, on asset management, whatever. And I know you've met a lot of them here at this committee. So, you know, day to day, those people absolutely have control of their briefs, and all of our strategic director roles always have that overview and leadership and strategic vision to enable them to do their jobs operationally. The reality is, of course, that there are a few gaps in Modernise at the minute, and of course, my priority is to fill those gaps. So having appointed Emma is a big part of that jigsaw. I think the other thing I would say is that, you know, I have in other jobs managed HR and IT, but again, you know, I'm not an HR expert or an IT expert, but the people that I manage are. So I think I've got a bit of form there, and I'm certainly not concerned by a lack of focus in either part of the whole of the department.
Thank you. Johnson.
Yes, so a couple of questions. Firstly, it's probably more, we can talk at length at this in the budget, but just wanted to ask about your thoughts in terms of the last budget scrutiny last year. There was a number of recommendations, and just wanted to ask, and feel free to answer this at the next meeting if you wish, how that has fed into this budget and putting that together as well, in terms of has some of those lessons been fed into this budget as well. And secondly, in terms
to remind me what all the recommendations were.
What I was going to ask about was voluntary redundancy.
Voluntary redundancy, and I'll
about 8 or 9. I need to go back and check.
Yeah, we'll be more than happy to go back and check. But and the second question was around modernisation. A lot has been talked about in terms of digital modernisation, but wanted to ask: is there any work being done in terms of internal modernisation or any other kind of modernisation in terms of looking at multi-layer? So, if you can.
Sure. Okay. So I shall talk about enhanced voluntary redundancy, which came out particularly from a recommendation of overview and scrutiny, and which Cabinet then adopted and put into place. And we've had a number of waves of that, really. We first had a wave which was open to all staff to apply, and then we've had a number of waves where, when certain teams were undergoing restructure, enhanced voluntary redundancy was available to staff. We've so far had 243 members of staff leave the council via that scheme. It's, from our point of view, very successful because it has enabled us to really, in a year where we thought we were going to have to make around 200 odd redundancies, to not be in a place where those were a load of compulsory redundancy schemes, and where we are in a position where the unions are also very supportive of that process, as well as management, and calling on us to do a further wave. We will be taking a further report, I think in March, looking at having a further enhanced voluntary redundancy round. There are some issues going forward. Government are introducing a £95,000 exit cap. Have introduced. Is it already in?
It's not enforced yet.
I don't think it's enforced yet.
No, it's not. I hope it's not, because
I'm advised it's not enforced yet.
It's not yet live.
Not yet live. We're not sure when it will be live or exactly how it's going to work in all elements. It might sound like a lot of money, but particularly if somebody's over 55, at which point they have to take their pension, and as part of their exit package we need to make a contribution into the council's pension fund to pay for that early retirement. It can actually be, so if someone's got a lot of years service, they can be on quite low pay and be knocking up against that £95,000 cap. So it is a really particular issue. It's a particular issue of concern to our staff who are worried about that, particularly our staff who are in that age group, thinking about some quite difficult decisions about whether they ought to jump now almost before the government puts that in. There's also some consultation going on at the moment looking at the potential for clawing back people's voluntary redundancy payments that government's very keen on, so that if somebody took another job within the public sector, not just sort of they try to come back to Southwark Council, but they'd left Southwark Council and taken their enhanced voluntary redundancy, well just any voluntary redundancy, and gone to work at another local authority in some time. If it was within a year, where they could see some of their voluntary redundancy being clawed back, although it's not clear at all how that would work, and they are consulting on making that wider than it was and across almost the whole public sector. Now I can see that acting as incredible disincentive for staff to take voluntary redundancy if it sort of ruled out a whole sort of segment of potential other career prospects. Also a huge disincentive for people staying in the public sector for work. So we are responding to those consultations to put out our concerns that we don't think that is the right way forward for voluntary redundancy. It has been something that has enabled us to make immense savings and to really transform service areas without so much pain and difficulty. As I say, it's worked for management as well as for staff, and we think it is a good thing.
That's why it's such an idiotic thing for the government to have
done,
because it will allow the public sector to save
Daily
money.
Mail politics, isn't it, of saying, oh, those terrible public sector workers getting their massive payouts, and I mean, it's simply not the case, and it's unfair on public sector workers. On other areas of modernisation, particularly HR is an area we are looking at. I know that Councillor Fleming's Audit and Governance Committee is doing a piece of work alongside us on ways we might change the way HR works. I think it's, though we have received Investing in People Gold this year, I do think there's a lot of potential in HR to make that a service that serves the council better, both our staff and management, as well as being smaller and saving money as well.
Can I just jump back to the issue of universal credit? You've touched on this a little bit, but I recall at the last Council Assembly meeting there was reference to a letter that we were writing or had written to Ian Duncan Smith, I think, with regard to the concerns that we had about the rollout in SE1. Now, have we had the reply to that?
Yes, I've got it here somewhere amongst my many pieces of paper. Yes, we wrote to him particularly concerned about the lack of clarity about how quickly we would see the rollout of universal credit and the impact. We do have some clarity on that now, but also particularly highlighting the fact that even at the stage when universal credit was being fully introduced in SE1 5, what we didn't have was clarity about how the government would be paying us the temporary accommodation management fee that the council receives through housing benefit claimants for local housing allowance payments, because we had been told about 18 months previously that they would need a new mechanism, a new legal mechanism to be able to pay that fee through universal credit. So we were dismayed 18 months on that government still hadn't told us how they were going to do it. I'm even more dismayed that he has written back to me, Lord Freud has in fact written back to me to say that, as the management fee is going to be abolished in 2017, we just thought we wouldn't bother, is essentially what he said. There are no arrangements to pay a temporary accommodation management fee in universal credit, and following the Chancellor's announcement in the recent spending review, the management fee currently paid in housing benefits to be abolished from April 17. Since it's going to be abolished, there is no plan for the department to make any arrangements in respect of universal credit temporary accommodation cases. I suggest that discretionary housing payments be considered where there is a shortfall. Now, for those of you familiar with our discretionary housing payments situation, we use our discretionary housing payments money that we get from government to help people hit by, for instance, bedroom tax or risk of homelessness if their rents are going up in the private sector. We always spend all the money that we've been given by government. The last few years we've topped it up, both from the HRA for council tenants and from our sort of hardship fund for private sector tenants and housing association tenants. And we more than spend it. The idea that there might be a pot of money that we could draw on, I mean, clearly Lord Freud has no concept of where we actually are. I think it's flippant. We're digesting this, we'll be responding. Helen Hayes MP has been particularly helpful and responsive on this too. I just despair really, and particularly with universal credit rolling out. It's bad enough that the management fee is going, we don't have this clarity about the new pot that's coming in April 17, but to suggest that, oh, because it's being abolished in a year, it doesn't matter if you don't get it for the next year. Yes. Brilliant.
And last one from me, and I think last one on this. Okay, one more from the lead as well. So last one from me. You mentioned the freedom on the precept for adult social care and council tax setting. You didn't really go much further in terms of where the latest thinking is on that. Could you give us an update on that?
Yeah, I mean, our thinking is much the same as every other, not every other, almost all London boroughs and most local authorities in the country, is that we will look to charge the 2% precept. What isn't clear at the moment, because there's very mixed messages coming from government, from officials, from politicians, is about whether there's some expectation that if you get precept, you therefore will be increasing spend on adult social care. Now, the scale of the savings we need to make from adult social care, well, across our entire budget, is such that, you know, a 2% precept of 1.7 million would not touch the size of the savings we need to make. So if that's their expectation, then we won't take a precept. But the indications are that that will not be the case, that they will accept that it either reduces the savings you need to make or you'll be spending it on something else. So we're currently considering on what precisely.
Presumably we'll know in good time.
I think so, and I think when we come on the 2nd of February, I'm sure Councillor Crine will have more to say on what we might want to do with that 1.7 million with the social care precept. So that's our current thinking.
Okay.
There's probably not a lot more I can say about that now. I'm not sure if there's anything Duncan wants to say about what messages we're getting.
No, not other than maybe in response to Gavin's question about when will we know. We expect to know in line with the final settlement, which is due at the end of February, end of January, the beginning of February. So there'll be very little time for us to put our ducks in a row to finalise a budget report. It's the most extraordinary settlement I've probably ever seen, in as much as there is no detail to go with the content of it. And Fiona also mentioned, I think, the issue about the efficiency programme that needs to go with a 4-year commitment to the settlement figures. One thing, Fiona, you didn't mention, but I know you would have intended to, is New Homes Bonus, which is a sharpened incentive, and that means that if we build homes after appeal, we will get no bonus, and the 6-year reward is being reduced to a 4-year reward. But we don't know more than that at the moment, other than 16, 17 seems to be secure. So it's a settlement that's a riddle in many ways, but the words from DCLG are very warm. But until we see that hard-coded response to the final settlement, I think we're still dancing in the dark.
Okay. And Anu.
Sorry, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I had a little thing that was picking up after Tom's point, but then a sort of proper question as well. Just on the point about staff using technology and how that I mean, is there, as part of the technology strategy or the digital strategy, a user group of staff, or is that something that's possible just because that seems to me a really helpful way of testing some of your ideas, but also doing that. So that was just a little suggestion.
Absolutely, and indeed last year we introduced what they call change champions. I think that a few of them in the room, people nodding their heads across the council. So that, I think that's absolutely crucial to bring staff along and to have leaders and innovators across the staff. I mean, sometimes I hear, council staff are a bit of a problem, they don't want to change. That's not my experience of when I talk to council staff. Council staff are frustrated that their IT doesn't work, that they've got better IT at home, that sometimes the best way to access their IT is to bring their own device and to log on to the Wi-Fi. And I think we owe it to our staff. You made that very good point about productivity loss. I think it's not acceptable, it's not okay for our staff. With the website improvements, we've been running a series of breakfast briefings and sessions. They've been extremely well attended by staff who are very interested to know how we might do things differently, how they might be a part of that, and that will absolutely be continuing and extending.
I just wanted to say, if you're not already doing
no,
that's
absolutely.
Sort of user group.
Absolutely. The idea that change will be driven from a small central team is a nonsense. It's got to reach out across the whole organisation.
But it also needs to feed back, I suppose.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Point of user group. My question is, you've talked about most areas of your portfolio. The one that you haven't really talked about is about performance management and corporate strategy, and obviously that's changed a bit over the years, and certainly as the opposition it has become more difficult to find some of those KPIs that we used to find as quite nice attacks. Suddenly that information doesn't exist, so I'm thinking fly tipping figures aren't produced in the same way. And it seems like now you kind of monitor the fairer future stuff, which I can understand why you need to do that, but that's quite self-selecting, and I just wondered, linked to the open data conversations of earlier, how you can actually try and be more transparent about some of the stuff that you don't necessarily want people to know about.
I don't think it's not wanting people to know about it. I think that's an unfair characteristic. I mean, what changed in 2010 was quite a big change from government. I mean, the previous government, they've been criticised for this, had set all these KPIs and these national performance frameworks of every council having to report the same thing. They scrapped all of that, the new government, and I think there was an element of that was good, because it meant some of the measures were a bit ridiculous, and having some local flexibility. I'm getting there. How we can redesign some of those measures. However, a lot of those are still measured at a departmental level. I'm sorry if you're having difficulty in accessing those. I'm sure if you contact chief officers,
they just used to be put out in
happy
public
to provide
domain.
them. Yes. I mean, I do take your point that the council plan is a bit sharper now and focusing in on a smaller number of things of our fairer future priorities, and perhaps not got quite such a long list of statistics. I will tell you that when I was chair of OSC, I had to FOI a lot of performance data, because no performance data was published under that previous administration, getting on for a year. So to suggest somehow that we are covering things up and not publishing data is really not fair or true. But if you want to particularly highlight which things you feel should be in the council plan that are not, we do review it annually, so do let us know.
Okay, so you don't have any active plans to sort of put more information out there?
I mean, we review the council plan every year, and I think it is important that we're picking up some of those things. I certainly think once we've agreed the budget and we can see which areas are going to be impacted and where it is important that we continue to track performance, I think there probably will be some changes to which things are in the council plan. But certainly a lot of those things are still monitored at a departmental level and are available. I think it's sort of worth discussing how is part of that big data openness, whether there is more potential for pushing more data slightly separately. I think that's a reasonable
for example,
point.
fly tipping
last one
on a map would actually be really helpful.
Well, that's a bit different from open data, isn't it? Because, I mean, the open data point is that you make the data available for
Someone
people
else
openly and then to make of what they will. I mean, the ultimate example being the TfL bus data, and where they simply publish instantaneously the locations of all the buses, and then there's all these other apps. They've not developed those apps. Other people go and develop those apps and create a way that we can find out when our bus is coming, which I love.
Data.
But so open data would mean we would publish the data, but not necessarily that we did all the mapping.
So would you be prepared to
Right,
publish
I think we need to finish. We've got other things on the agenda tonight. That's about the 5th question now, Anud. So I know. Well, you've pretty much asked the same question about 4 times now. So
yes.
Well, it's up to the cabinet member to answer, not for you to answer for them, is it? So I'm going to call a close to the interview now. Thank you for coming along. Thank you to the officers as well. And I suggest we take a 5-minute break. I know.